Morning, David. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thanks. It's really nice to talk to you. You and I, of course, are connected on a number of different levels. Really, we're colleagues here at Odgers Burnson, but you're someone I've had great pleasure to get to know over the years as a leader in the life sciences. I mean, you've built and run big organisations. You've worked with much smaller scaling
Yeah.
organisations. You're a very well-established consultant working with all sorts of clients at the moment out in the market. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about a subject that I think really matters, which is, of course, ethics in leadership.
Thank you, Chris. And frankly, it's really nice to have this conversation because I think it's really important, and it's probably becoming even more important if you not just look internally within organizations, but externally, and how the world is changing. So really pleased to have this conversation, and as always, spend time with you, Chris, and the Odgers team.
Brilliant. Well, right back at you, David. That's great. Look, why don't we just start then? I mean, I think it's an interesting place to start in the conversation. But
Yeah.
what does ethics in leadership mean to you? And apply as many different lenses to that as you like.
It's a great question. And funny enough, I was talking to some high potential leaders just last week and talking about if you take an external lens on business, in the past, you used to look at the classic PEST analysis, the political, economic, sociological, technological, and that sort of changed over time. And now it's PESTLE, but with an E on the end. And the E on the end is ethics. And so ethics has come in, environmental has come in, legal has come in, but ethics is, it always was there to some degree, and it has increased over time with legislation and guidance and law and so on and so on. But actually, I think it's a lot more than that now. For me, it's doing the right thing in a world which is increasingly challenging on what the right thing is. So I don't think it's really possible to have a business leadership conversation or a plan or a sort of an execution of a strategy unless you really consider what ethical implications there are.
And going back to your corporate leadership career,
Yeah.
do you remember presenting to boards, talking to colleagues about the ethics of the business, how we work this into the fabric of the company, the kind of living and breathing the values and the ethics of an organization? Or is this more
Uh,
a recent thing?
yeah, I think for me it was always dressed up as compliance and what's the legal, what's the speed limit? Not necessarily, when if the speed limit is 30 miles an hour, you need to know that it's 30 miles an hour. But why would you then travel at 20 in a 30-mile-hour zone? It's because it's the right thing to do for the conditions for the road. But the law is 30. So, I've grown up in the pharmaceutical industry, very regulated, very compliance driven. I worked for an American organization for many years with Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act, anti-bribery and corruption in the UK. So the compliance framework is extremely important, the 30 miles an hour speed limit, but doing the right thing is, for me, is so much more than that. And I think doing the right thing is what's not just it's not taken over because there's still the speed limit, but I think it's become increasingly important to what is the right thing to do, even though the law says this. Should we, maybe we ought to do something that's a bit better and to demonstrate our beliefs and our values within an organizational context as leaders.
I think that's really interesting. And ethics, of course, I mean, it's interesting every sector, but I would say maybe even more so in life sciences, in healthcare,
100%.
because what organizations in this arena, of course, touch people's lives in the most personal and most impactful way. But you're right, there's always been that kind of umbrella of compliance and regulation, and therefore organizations that are meeting those regulatory standards are therefore ethical.
For the last 10, 15 years, it felt wrong doing some of the things that maybe the pharmaceutical industry has been doing. I've been to congresses with huge lavish stands, huge lavish dinners and so on. And then you think this may be within the compliance framework, but it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like this is the right thing to do for an organization. Yes, maybe some of the the clients or the customers or the healthcare professionals I've been working with have said, this is a bit odd. But I think it comes from the leaders within organizations who have felt this is the wrong thing to do. So what's the standards that we want to live by as a life sciences industry? What do I want to live by? I think also that it's changed with generations, which I think is important. I think, if I look at what my kids expect, if they're 30 and 27, and I think they expect from leadership a different standard than perhaps there has been acceptable in the past.
And David, where I think I'm going with this is around the impact on organizational culture, because I guess to be ethical, to be able to kind of really believe in ethics, you need the culture of an organization to be able to sustain that. So, I mean, part of that's probably whistleblowing, but it's also a culture which kind of empowers people to challenge practices, to challenge behaviors. I mean, do you see that having really evolved in kind of corporate world? Do you see a marked difference actually in some of the smaller companies, which I guess are building culture from the ground up, because it starts with the founders and they gradually hire people into a certain mold? I mean, I'm quite interested in your reflections on that.
I think that the thing that's consistent, Chris, is that the leader casts a long shadow. So if the leader behaves in a certain way, it's likely that the organization will behave in a certain way. And that is true for a large organization as a small organization. In a large organization, there's sort of backup systems and processes like speak up hotlines and things like that. And for me, that's great, but it's a fail safe, but shouldn't be an alternative for a culture where people do feel safe to talk and safe to challenge. And I think that's where ethics really comes into its own. And I do see that in smaller organizations, for good and bad, that where the culture is right, people do speak up without the hotline. They just speak up directly. They feel safe and supported to say what's really on their mind, if things are working or if behaviors are not right. Even though they were within the law and within compliance, it feels wrong, and they call behaviors out. And I think, certainly I am attracted to organizations. That's why I work with Odgers. I am attracted to organizations where the culture feels as though it's an open, transparent, safe environment.
We can't do a video interview and not talk about AI. It's something that hits board discussions. It's something that hits the day-to-day chit-chat in organizations. But there is no doubt, I mean, there is an ethical tidal wave hurtling towards this sector and others.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually really embracing and embedding AI. Do you see much of this in the market, or is it more talk than actual kind of substance at the moment?
People talk about it all the time, and so it's definitely a conversation topic in the organizations that I work with. I think the general viewpoint is what's truth now. What is, so how do we know? Because our normal tests of humanity to check truth and check one source of facts are being challenged. So as a business leader, basing ethical decisions on one source of the truth isn't quite as certain as it might have been in the past. So I think there's a personal responsibility to look at AI as a challenge on one source of the truth and on fact. The famous fake news from the political recent history, I think has really opened the world's eyes and business leaders to how we can be manipulated. And how businesses can be manipulated. And so ethics are based on fact and reason and certainty and truth and speaking up, as we talked about. So I think there's a responsibility for us all now to be much more certain of the facts that we're talking about, the truth, the sources. And so, yes, AI is ever present, but I think the bigger picture is what's truth.
And I think when you think about one of the applications, of course, AI in life sciences is around drug discovery. I mean, using it not just as a way to manage big data, but actually as the tool through which new compounds come out of nowhere and are actually very rapidly progressed through discovery into development, etc. And I think, that's kind of happening now. It hasn't quite gone the way. It hasn't quite gone the distance yet.
Yeah.
but you do wonder again whether regulation and whether the sort of ethical framework around that can keep pace with the technological progression which we're already seeing. I mean, we've done a fair bit of work in the tech bio space, including for one of the top three tech giants in the world who are using AI in a drug discovery context. And I think it is very interesting taking those sorts of roles out to the market because people believe in them, people are quite excited by them, but it can sometimes raise kind of more challenges than we have the answers to at the moment.
I think that's right, Chris. When I think about use of AI and drug discovery, I feel confident that some of the leading organizations using that are ethically sound. I look at the leaders and their behaviors, and then I translate that to if that's how they behave in those organizations, and that's the culture, AI will be managed appropriately and will be responsible even before the legislation, the ethics and the right behavior. So going back to doing the right thing with ethics doesn't mean traveling at 30 miles an hour. Maybe there's no speed limit on that particular AI road. However, those organizations with the right ethical behavior will set the right standards. And so I feel really confident from drug discovery. It's what we don't know about, how AI is being used in areas that we don't know about, large language models and so on. And, all this stuff with sort of visual fakery and mimicry, it just becomes really challenging. What is human, and our normal tests for humanity to say is that real or not, I feel less confident about because we just don't know. So on a life sciences drug discovery, ethical behavior companies with ethical standards and the appropriate culture, I think it will be fine. But outside of that, I'm perhaps much more concerned.
And I think there's one sector you would back to kind of really get a grip of this, though. I think probably it is the life sciences, because with every major breakthrough in science, it could be cell and gene therapy, which probably before it really happened raised all sorts of challenges. And I think what you're starting to see now is this stuff is out there. It's being developed. It's being scaled. And it is a massive movement and a transformational one within modern medicine. So I'm guessing AI is going to be the next thing. Okay, let's move from AI to DE&I now. And again, I mean, this isn't a new topic by any stretch of the imagination, but it is still one which, rightly so, is talked about by all of our clients. In every process, in every conversation we have about leadership and culture, about organizational development and growth. I mean, this is a central feature of the conversation, which is great. What's your perspective, I suppose, on where this sector has got to with DE&I, particularly from an ethical standpoint? And we talked earlier about organizational culture, but do you feel the life sciences is where it needs to be in this
No, I don't yet, but I think huge progress has been made, but it's not consistent from organization to organization. So there are some industry life science leaders in this field, and allowing everyone to show up as their best selves and to be free to be psychologically safe in their organization. That's everyone, and it's not the majority or certain pockets or certain special interest groups, but it's everyone. And so making this mainstream is not, I don't think, where the life science sector is yet. I still think for some organizations, it's still on the sidelines. It's, one DE&I lead certain groups and so on, rather than this just the way we do stuff around here. And to create a culture of ethical standards and behavior that is more than just the legal requirement, requires everyone, not just small populations. So, I'm really pleased with working with organizations that are leaders in this field, but it isn't everywhere yet.
And you and I hosted a seminar last week for a good collection of leaders across the global life sciences, and we were very lucky to be joined by our colleague Sue Johnson, who is our DE&I expert. She runs a diagnostic and an advisory service for clients across all sectors. I thought was really interesting was just the consistency of themes which came up in that seminar last week. I mean, a big one was I mean, you've touched on it there, psychological safety.
Yeah.
You know, big, small, it doesn't really matter about the size of organization, but actually the challenges of really embedding that in the psyche of an organization, I think, you know, I mean, it's still quite significant, I think.
I think you're bang on, Chris. And this is, you know, if you look at some of the sort of the leaders in this, the thought leaders like Amy Edmondson from the US, you know, this isn't about organizations becoming just nice to each other. It's about organizations creating an environment where people can call out behaviors that are not appropriate or don't fit with ethical standards that the company or the corporation or whatever it is are trying to achieve. And that's everyone feeling safe to call out the tough things. You know, in our industry, you know, it is moving towards life and death. In the healthcare industry, which we serve, it is life and death. You know, there are many instances where patients have died or have had serious implications by staff not feeling safe, and that's really awful. You know, and I want to live in a world where people can call out bad behavior.
And you know, again, life sciences and healthcare are not unique in this sense, but I think they are very powerful examples of where DE&I, you know, impacts huge workforces. I mean, we're talking, you know, millions of people just in the UK, and then, you know, many millions of people globally that work in this sector. But then we're into the billions in terms of lives touched by the products and services that, you know, our clients provide.
Yes.
And where DE&I has such a seismic impact on the patient community. I mean, there are huge examples now of social and health inequalities in, you know, in care and products. You know, women's health being one example where simply not enough money, not enough time and effort has ever really gone into R&D and developing products for women's health.
Yeah.
Saw some of this in COVID around access to different groups in the community. So I do think it's probably a moment in time now where the light has really been shed on DE&I, not just from an organizational talent and people management perspective, actually the people we exist to serve out in the world. Let's move to the final subject. I mean, this is another really big one, and we can't do it justice today, but, you know, environment, sustainability. I mean, it really is the other big thing out there, isn't it? I mean, I think there isn't an organization of any size in any sector that now doesn't have very major legal requirements, but also social expectations on it in terms of environmental policy, sustainability, and kind of walking the walk. I mean, how much of your time is taken up?
Going back to the pestle, you know, we talked about ethics. Ethics is about people, purpose, and planet. And, you know, planet, it isn't just saving your plastic bottles and recycling and sending them off every other week to the bin man. It's actually making a difference. You know, my daughter is in the NHS. My son is an ecologist, and, you know, it's moved from doing no harm to doing neutral to having a positive benefit. So how can organizations actually have a positive benefit? And it all boils down to courageous leadership. So it's, you know, imagine a world where organizations that you and I work with or represent, where there is courageous leadership in sustainability and, you know, and having a positive impact on the planet. My heart sinks when the discussion about net zero comes up in political circles. Oh, let's put it off, you know, because the cost of petrol's too high, or whatever it is. You know, let's not switch to from gas boilers to, you know, air source heat pumps and so on. You think you're just missing the point. You know, we want to pass on to our next generation a world which is at least not worse, but hopefully better than the current world we have today. And sustainability in the environment impacts all of us, not just personally, but professionally as well. And, you know, I fundamentally believe that organizations should take care and have a positive impact on the planet, not just a do no harm attitude.
Yeah, I think the life sciences sector, I mean, maybe more specifically the pharmaceutical sector, has taken some ethical knocks over the years. You know, so some of the issues that are still resonating today, of course, the opioid addiction crisis in the US. You know, there have been various kind of drug pricing, some scandals, but nevertheless lots of discussions around the price points of drugs and again access to these medicines in different states. I mean, do you think as a sector we've got some ground to make up?
Can we do better? Yes, we can still do better. I want to feel proud of the organization or the sector that I work with. And there have been some big issues in the past, and I do think we can still do better. I think it's much better than when I first started. I really do. Not just from a legislation and a sort of a compliance framework, but actually from a behavior point of view. But we have to still keep doing even better. You know, we make medicines and vaccines, life-changing therapies, and it cannot be associated with those things that you described, like price gouging or inappropriate bribery situations. That's just, it's painful and wrong. Let me say that word. It's wrong. It's not the right thing to do.
David, we've talked a lot about ethics and your observations of the sector, organisations you've worked for before, you work with. I mean, you are a hugely respected, established leader in the life sciences, and you still are. You wear several different hats now. What are the ethical challenges you face day to day when you're, in your own work with different clients?
That's a really good question, Chris. I think at the very, if I'm brutally honest, there are a couple of pieces of work in my portfolio that I have turned down when I've done some due diligence on the organization. I thought, I don't feel comfortable with the ethics of that organization. So it's, for me, I feel acutely responsible to be diligent about ethics with the people I work with, because it's not just one organization, it's many. And so I have to keep checking before I take on an assignment, before I work with a leader, or what are the ethical standards of those individuals? What is the compliance framework? Is it, subtly different, the requirements? And if I feel uncomfortable, I do test it out and I check, but I also then, if I'm really uncomfortable, I turn the work down. It's not, I do not want to be associated with unethical behavior. So it's up to me to call it out and say, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable with this work.
But David, I think we've covered, we've skirted around some very, very big topics, and obviously that's the nature of the conversation we're having. But ethics in leadership is such a broad and important topic. We could spend hours and hours on each one of these sub areas. But as always, it's been enjoyable, insightful, kind of an all-encompassing discussion, and I'm really grateful to you for finding a bit more time to talk to me today.
Absolute pleasure, Chris. This is such an important topic, Ben. It's good to share. It's good to share thoughts with you, and I really do hope and believe we can make a difference if we all are courageous, like you say, and just go one step forward.
Thank you.